Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We finished the top of page 1320, the paragraph. So to sum up what we learned and where we're at, talking about the two ways of sweetening severities. Both come from Chesed. The difference is one nullifies or neutralizes, and the other actually transforms the Gevurah, the severities to Chesed. That's the key distinction between the two. We will learn about a third level that he referred to briefly in the middle of page 1318, but that will come later. That will begin, as I said, on page 1325. So, in further analyzing these two different methods, what earlier he called a Neisa oven, a Kavish oven, or Neisa oven, many different ways that the Rebbe Rashab explained it. I'm not going to go through all the aspects of it. But on page 1319 to 1320, the last paragraph, two main points that he made was that both are done through Chesed. And even the second one, the transformation, is also not initiated by Gevurah. It's initiated by Chesed, by a power outside of it, a higher power. Like when we say, Ha'hevchi Hatsur, Agam Mayim, one that transformed the rock into a lake or pool of water, is Mitzad Hagilim El Maila, as he puts it here. Like it says in the previous pasuk, Melifnei Oden Chulei Haaretz. Explain the levels of that. And the same thing when you say Veyafich Hashem Elekecha Lechos Aklol Lebracha, that the transformation of the curse to the blessing is coming through Hashem Elekecha, like he says Havaya, comes from Atzmus Hamay Erein Sof Atzmus Hamaitza. And then the second part of this is, which is explaining why indeed, or what are the dynamics that distinguish between these two types of sweetening, is that the first Tamtaka, the first level of sweetening, is one coming more from a chesed that relates to Gevurah. They're both commensurate in their same reality. So it's true, it's drawing down from Rav Chesed of Arich Ampin, and that's why there's an abundance of chesed that overwhelms, or overrides, I should say, overpowers Gevurah, but it's not completely outside of that realm. So it's two aspects. It's engaging with Gevurah, but it's sweetening it. It's like saying the waters, the sweet waters and the bitter waters, they're both water. However, there's more sweet water than bitter water. So it's not transformation, but it's not transformation, but it sweetens it because it's more or less in the same world, even though it's drawing from Rav Chesed. In the parentheses, he explained that even though Chesed has an element of bligvul to it, whereas Gevurah is gvul limit, but he explained in Atzilus it's not really bligvul. It's only bligvul in its personality, that it's a free-flowing. Whereas real bligvul is a chesed that's higher, the level's higher than Atzilus. There's a true unlimited element to them. And there's takano Gevurah, less smaller, like he says. However, when there is this gabrus, when chesed overpowers Gevurah, it's accessing, like he said at the bottom, so chesed of Arich Ampin is radiating within chesed of Zah. So on one hand, so it's commensurate, it's like engaging, like we learned earlier, there is a battle, but chesed wins. And the same thing with the animal soul and divine soul and animal soul. That was the last piece we learned. Top of page 1320, that the divine soul manifests within the animal soul. So they're commensurate to each other. Ata barasa, the neshama has nivra, the neshama has come into the level of nivra, shezeu be'erech, so it's become proportionate and commensurate to manifest within the animal soul. It's not the nefesh elikis as it is in its pure root, chelik elikam emal mamish, or neshama shenesat b'taherehi. Why? Because the and so too the bittul and the birur and the bittul, the refinement of the animal soul is that it affects the refinement of the animal soul is such that the divine soul is Hislabshus there. So therefore it affects the animal soul that way. And that too, on the same time that it's commensurate to it, also comes from a koyach elyon, mashbiyin, I say, the strength, the power, the being sated from the word seva, that the neshama, the nefesh alikis, is being fed a higher power, just like chesed of Zah is getting chesed of Arichampin to dominate over the animal soul, as we discussed. Now I was going to continue this discussion, all still in the first level of sweetening that is neutralizing, that's overpowering severities and the water, but it doesn't transform it fundamentally. Its etzem mahus, its personality has not been changed. It's just been nullified, or has been overridden, or overpowered, or outnumbered, whatever word you use for it. Just 1 second. Okay. So we're going to start the paragraph on page 1320. Top 5 lines from the top. You want to follow? Go to ayinbeis.com. There the text PDFs of these pages can be found. Okay. However, gam kishemer b'chinas Rav Chesed Arichampin. Even when, or also when, that level of Rav Chesed, abundance of Chesed, which is coming from Arichampin, not the Chesed Mugbal, limited in Atzilus, which I, by the way, should have added one more point he made, that compared to Biyah, the bottom of the page, he also said, and the parentheses, the Ikar b'chinas Heder Agbal l'gabe Biyah. Another point that Atzilus only relative to Biyah is the main focus, that it doesn't have limit. Just wanted to add that. Anyway, continuing here. So also when this abundant chesed, which is coming from Arichampin, is radiating into chesed of Zah, which gives it the power, like the waters have now become abundant, so the sweet of chesed is sweetening the severities of Gevurah. The oz nepach midas hadin lemidas harachamim. So this in turn causes, and now he uses this expression, even though he hinted to it before several places, transforms the midas hadin, judgments, to the attribute of judgment, to the attribute of rachamim, compassion or love. So even though you'll say, why does he say nepach? We're not talking about transformation, because he doesn't mean here the transformation of the Gevurah and Betzemos. He means, practically speaking, the bitter waters have been sweetened. Gevurah is being sweetened even in the lower level. It's sweetened. So that's what he means here, nepach. He doesn't, not referring necessarily to the deeper level. Well, he's not referring, not just necessarily, he's not referring to that deeper level. So it says in the pasuk, Hashem Yetzim came, he goes out of his location, his locale. What does that mean? The Isa Yerushalmi Pedig Beis the Tain is Seif Allah Aleph. In Yerushalmi it says, the end of the 2nd chapter of Tainis, the end of Halacha Aleph. That's how Yerushalmi is structured, Prakim and Halachas. It says Yetzim Amida Lamida. When he says Yetzim Imkeme, what does it mean? God leaves his place. We know God is everywhere. So he means he leaves a certain state to go into another state. From one midah, from one so-called personality trait to another personality trait. What is that? Yetzilei, midas adin, midas adachim and Yisrael. Like we learned earlier about Rosh Hashanah, that when they blow shofar, they're able to go from kisei shel din to kisei shel rachamim. In other words, he moves from the throne of judgment to the throne of compassion. Similar here. So he leaves Yetzilei, he's leaving a state of more severity and din and judgment, and enters into a zone of rachamim, Yisrael, for the Jewish people. So this the Rebbe Rashab is just adding more to this state, but he's going to say an omnam. It's important. There's a qualification he's going to make here. We'll soon see what that is. Here the Rebbe Rashab is connecting it. So what's the process here? What's the dynamic that's going on? That when the Rebbe was in the Midas Hadin, so Chesed was here, Gevurah is here. As we said, they're commensurate to each other. And sometimes Hashem will be in the state of din, and sometimes in the state of compassion, rachman. But then there's a state, what causes the Yetzim and Keme, that God moves from one zone, from one state to another, when there's a gili, a revelation of Rav Chesed, the abundance of Chesed, of Arich Ampin, Bizah, and that's transmitted and drawn into Zah of Atzilus, which is the Midas, Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes, Netzach, just say of Atzilus. Shalei b'bchinas Hislabshus Bizah, Ki'im b'bchinas Maiver. That doesn't come manifest in Zah. And I'll explain Hislabshus and Maiver. We learned it a number of times, but only in a form of Maiver. So he's adding now a key point. Let me just back up and you'll see in a moment the explanation. Very geschmack. We know that the Seder Hislabshus works in a very progressive, orderly fashion. Like the Tzimtzum, after the Tzimtzum, the entire Ein Sof was concealed. Then comes a Kav. After the Rishim, the Kav, and the Kav measures and starts creating existence. First, Ak, Adam Kadmen, Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim, Tikkun, level by level. So, in context of where we are right now, so we know there's Kesed of Atzilus, and from Kesed will come Atzilus. If you want to put Kesed in terms more in Hasidic terms, it would be Atik and Arich, the pleasure and the desire of each world creates the next world. If God doesn't have a will, a rotzen, and a tainug, it won't be created. So Kesed is the source, the immediate source for Atzilus. Now we know it goes through Tzimtzumim. Kesed on its own is a higher level than Atzilus. We actually learned at length, Chochma Ma'ayin Timotza. How does Chochma, which is the first sphere of Atzilus, conscious faculty or attribute of Atzilus, it comes Ma'ayin Timotza, from the Ayin of Kesed. It goes through a channel that the super consciousness of Kesed is the source. That's why Chochma is like a spark. So this is me. This is all what I'm talking now is a Hislabshus darge acher darge. I think he even used that word, and the Alter Rebbe says it in Tanya chapter 36 and more than 36. He says it in chapter 2, and I believe also in chapter 6. He talks about the Hislabshus of one level, how the Ur of Ein Sof slowly manifests one level after the level, at next level, all in an orderly fashion where it gets more and more diminished. This is called Hislabshus. I think he said before the expression, I'm just looking where he chaful, chapul, and mechupul. A few pages back, he definitely called the Hislabshus of one level to the next. Like he said before, the Hislabshus of the Nefesh Alikis, the Nefesh Abamis. It's not doing it from above. That defines Hislabshus. So when you say Chesed of Atzilus, for example, Zohar Ampin, as I explained, is a manifestation of Arich Ampin, but through Hislabshus. Arich Ampin is the level of Kesed, Rotzen, the will of a person. Zohar is already as it manifests in particular midas, Chesed, love, discipline, compassion, etc. But that's B'derech Hislabshus. So you can say that Zohar Ampin is rooted in Arich Ampin, but B'derech Hislabshus, and therefore it's diminished. You can't say Arich Ampin is the level of Zohar Ampin, just like you can't say the level of Kesed is not the level of Atzilus. It's higher. But then there's another track that goes on through Hislabshus, which is called B'derech Maiver. Some things, like an express train, don't assume the properties of the lower level. It's like a train that passes through certain stations. For example, when you say that a neshama of a tzaddik or a rebbe comes down to this world, you call it a neshama of Atzilus. So it's a very simple klotz kasha. Isn't every neshama rooted in Atzilus? We say every morning. Everybody says, neshama shenasata bi tahirahi. We all come from Atzilus. However, it comes through Hislabshus, through Ata Varosa, and Ata Yitzartov, Ata Nafachtabi. So it goes through, so it assumes the properties of Bria, and then assumes the properties of Yetzirah. So it's not just passing through, it's actually Hislabshus, it's manifesting and assuming the properties of the next level. When you say it's a neshama of Atzilus comes to this world, like Moshe Rabbeinu, it also goes through Bria, Yetzirah, Nasir, but he's passing through like an express train, which means he's not assuming the properties of Bria, Yetzirah, Nasir. Still goes through it, so it has some impact. Alter Rebbe in Kuntus Achen says, even Maiver, even passing through has some impact. That's why Tzaddik also says, Ata Baros, Ata Yitzart. But it's a very different type of impact. Because he remains essentially, as the Alter Rebbe says, that when Moshe spoke to Parei, it was Atzilus speaking to Erves Haaretz to the lowest level. Moshe was Atzilus in this physical world. So now, when you say that Chesed sweetens Gevurah, you just said that Chesed and Gevurah are equal to each other. So why is not the case that Gevurah overpowers Chesed at times? Just like sweet water and bitter water. Who says it's always going to be sweet? Now, if you're talking about Arich Ampin is always sweet, fundamentally. But when they come into Atzilus, Arich Ampin has become diminished. But that's when it's in Hislabshus. That's in the regular process. Then there are times where we can invoke and access the Chesed of Arich Ampin, Rav Chesed, without the Hislabshus. So we're getting it in its purer form. It's probably still not exactly as it is up there, but it's now giving Chesed of Atzilus power to be more sweet water than bitter water. Without that, Chesed and Gevurah are like in battle, like the prosecutor and the defense. And Midas Adin and Midas Arachim. The Eibishter moves means something evoked that God should move from one state to the other. He says that's Amshoch of Rav Chesed without Hislabshus. Bizarre. Kim b'bchinas maiver. So it's passing through the higher levels and not Hislabshus, because if it's Hislabshus, then Zoh, Chesed and Gevurah would become more equal to each other. The Rav Chesed is an overflow, so to speak, of Chesed coming from its source in Arich Ampin. And what does Maiver do here, he says? The Inyan B'chinas Maiver Kan, because sometimes Maiver still assumes, as I said, properties from a lower level. We learned this earlier. He brought it a long time back. Remember, it was on the left side of the page on the top, where Maiver, he said, from Kuntus Achen still has an impact. It's not negated to our discussion here. But by saying Maiver Kan, because sometimes Maiver is used differently, that there is some impact. He says, the Inyan B'chinas Maiver Kan hu she'eina oir mishtana klal. Maiver here means that the of Rav, the Chesed Rav of Arich Ampin did not change at all. Bizarre. It's radiating in Zoh exactly as it is in Arich Ampin. It didn't change at all. So what I said before, that maybe you went through something, here he's saying clearly it didn't change at all. And that means because in this case we're dealing with the Ur of Arich Ampin is radiating literally in a revealed way. It's not just giving more strength to the level of Chesed of Zoh, the Oza Ikar B'chinas Chesed of Zoh, because then the primary force would be Chesed of Zoh. Okay, let me explain that. So now he's talking about three levels. You have Zoh, where Chesed and Gevurah are more or less equals. You could have that from Arich Ampin radiates a Teisvus Kayach, more strength, but the primary force that's at work is Chesed of Zoh. So it has more strength than regular Zoh, Chesed of Zoh, but it's still the primary thing is Chesed of Zoh, which means it's not complete Maiver. There's some Hislabshus, not complete Hislabshus, but something. Those are Ikar B'chinas Chesed of Zoh, Rak Shemeir B'Zoh Odem B'chinas Chesed Arich Ampin.
It's not
the only thing is that, let me finish. The only thing, it has a reflection from the level of chesed arachampin. Aval kasher b'chinas chesed meir begili mamish b'zah, which is what we're referring to here. That when chesed of arachampin radiates begili mamish, in other words, it's not just giving strength to chesed of zah. The zah eina er mishtana klal. Then the air of arachampin doesn't change at all. Ub'chinas zah hu kulei chsadim k'may arachampin. And zah becomes full chsadim, full sweetness, like arachampin. And that's what he's referring to here. So right here, you see that even in the sweetening of waters, let's give a simple example. Let's say you have 50% bitter, 50% sweet. So some people will taste more the sweet, some people will taste the bitter. It'll be a very mix. It'll be bittersweet, basically. You can have a situation where there's more chesed being poured in from arachampin, and it's 60-40. Just using that as an example, 70-30. Or you could have so much coming from chesed, Rav Chesed of arachampin, that you have it in its purest form, and then it completely dominates, and the bitter is completely nullified. Even though we learned earlier it has some effect, but from a point of view, practically speaking, you'll only taste sweetness. There won't be any drop of bitterness there. That means the bitter has become transformed to sweet, not in its fundamental personality. That's the second form of sweetness. But in this first level itself, he's just described several levels. But what our goal is that it should be Rav Chesed of arachampin as it is, has now entered into Zah, and Zah is therefore kulei chsadim because it's like the level of arachampin without change. That's called maiver. What he means here, that's a full maiver. That's the ultimate that is just traveled through the levels to Zah, but it did not assume the properties through that journey. Whereas in the first, it does assume, and primarily Chesed of Zah, which has some extra strength from Rav Chesed. Here he's talking about not just extra strength, but it actually has Gili Mamish of Arachampin, so it becomes Kulech Sodik Morichampin. The Ein HaKelim de Zah, I'm going to read one more line, then I'll stop. And the containers of Zah do not, Ein Mastirim, Ein Kelim Zah Mastirim ala Er. The containers of Zah are not concealing on this oil that's coming from Arachampin. Like it says elsewhere. So in the first level, literally the first, they're for sure Hislabshus, Chesed and Gevurah, both are in their containers. In the second level, where it gives more koyach, the kelim of Zah are still concealing an arachampin, but there's a little more abundance, a little more surge, a little more energy. Tesus koyach. What we're talking now is that it's maiver completely, that it just passed through, and the kelim are not concealing on this chsadim of arachampin that have now become the level of chesed of Zah, and that's why it's kulech chsadim. It overrides and completely nullifies the bitterness of Gevurah. So that's what he added. That's one second. Yeah. Okay. So but remember, the omnam still has to be explained. So he's going to still give a qualification, which we'll read in a moment. I'll stop here for any questions.
So this B'derech Ma'avir is referring to Ribui Hamayim HaMesukim, right? It's not referring.
That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying.
To the second thing that the.
That's very clear. That's absolutely. The second thing is on page 1321. The second level is clearly. That's as clear as day. Yeah, absolutely.
So how would you say if it would be Teisas Kayach, not Ma'avir, what would that be? Not even Ribui Hamayim.
I just gave an example. It would be like 60-40. That the sweetness is stronger than the bitter, but it still has bitterness there. It means the din still has nesinus makim. It's not really been totally transformed to midas harachamim.
That's interesting because I did not understand it like this, but you sound right.
What is it about this source in the Yerushalmi that gives the Rabbi the proof, a raya, that this is derech ma'avir and not derech Hislabshus?
First of all, I don't know if it's a proof, but regardless, the Yerushalmi does is it explains that there's a complete move from a state of din to a state of rachamim. So that's what, first of all, the Yerushalmi says that clearly. Yeitzeh memida lemida, So that is called nepach, the transformation from judgment, severity to sweetness. So you can call it a proof as well, because he does say it's a complete move. If it would not be a complete move, you wouldn't say yetzim emkeme. You would say, you know what, there's a little. Here, it's completely like he says, he went over from midas din to midas harach. But I don't know if he's just bringing it as a proof, even though I think it is also a proof. The main point he wants to make is he's grounding it, this whole concept in Chazal. But technically speaking, it's also a proof, just like the proof of transforming the stone into water. The word hayhofchi, the transformation, is the key for emphasis.
No, I'm trying to. If it's a proof, it's a proof. Then that answers my question.
That's not the way it works. Chassidus does not really bring proofs. Chassidus brings a Maimer Chazal. It could serve, if you wish, as substantiating this. If he didn't bring the Yerushalmi, nothing would change here in Havana. The Yerushalmi just strengthens and really grounds it. Is it a proof? I think it is a proof as well. Can you start arguing? This is not a Gemara here. He's not like saying that without this proof you can't make the case for it. But it definitely makes the Yerushalmi much more clear, because the Yerushalmi is saying that he moves from one to the next. If it was just more strength to chesed, like he says, his gabrus taste was koyach, you wouldn't call it yetzim emkeme. So that to me is a very strong proof. Yetzim emkeme means he moved from a state of judgment to a way to now it's kulei chesed, it's kulei rachamim. That to me is a very strong case for it, if you want to use the word proof.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? You may recall I asked the question much earlier when he said that the sweet waters the bitter waters were sweetened in Mara. So I asked, what's the proof that you know that the waters themselves were sweet? Maybe they were just overpowered. So even though he's talking that level as well here, but there it was pretty clear that he was understanding that pasuk in that way, and we discussed it at length. From the Medrash on page 13-15. There, the point was that from the bitterness itself came sweetness. The Medrash clearly was proof to that, but from the pasuk, once you say mayim nimtokim, that the water itself became sweet. Clearly, there are different levels. But anyway, let's continue. So what we've definitely gone a little deeper into here is that there are different levels of the sweetening. And his goal here, even in the first level, is talking about that it kulei chesed, like he says, kulei chsadim, because it's arich ampim b'derech maiver. Till this paragraph, he didn't mention that yet. So now he's broken it down even further. And yet, it's still not the second form of sweetening, which is the etzem uchus, the very personality of Gevurah is transformed. This is still not the full personality. It's just that there's enough chsadim that completely override the Gevurah. So that's what he's going to qualify. Umakol mokim.
Why do you have to say Maivir? I know what you said, but even if you said face was koyach, it could also be understood that it's
no, it can't be, because face was koyach, as he said, then it's a little more chesed than Gevurah, but it's not the total. You need the total chesed of arich ampin to come in here in full play. Can it be the lower level? It could be, but that's not what he wants here. He does want the sweetening of the Gevurah and the best possible way in this first manner, in this first eifin.
Is the Rabbi going to go on to explain how we can actually actualize this? Bring down this level of Erech Ampin B'derech Maiver? Is he going to give a practical way we can do this in our Avodas Hashem?
Well, I hope so, but even till now, He did mention, for example, Yom Kippur, Shuvah. So he's already told us the tools to do it. There are methods to do it. What we're learning here, he's not only talking about the levels, but for example, on the top of page 1319 spoke about Yom Kippur. Now, Yom Kippur is an Avodah. We work hard on not just erasing the sins, but transforming them. So we have the strength of Yom Kippur. He mentioned, I think, a few other things as well. Kevish Oven, I'm just looking back. Above all, the Avodah here is the Nefesh HaLekis. If you want to go back, and you have to always keep that in mind, on page 1308, after you explain the darkness of this world and the Avodah, so he said, for us to be able to start piercing and ultimately dispelling and then ultimately transforming the darkness, and here we're already learning many levels of transforming, all that comes through effort, where you allow your animal soul, your divine soul, to come alive through contemplating on godliness, and then bringing that contemplation, and he brings details of that contemplation on page 1308 and 1309, then making sure that that contemplation turns into midas, where you begin to really feel and aspire and long for godliness, in turn will affect the animal soul, that it also should long for it. So if you want the actual formula, you go back to can everybody just mute? If you want the actual formula, what you simply got to do is go back to 1308, 1309 and on, where he talks about the process of how we actually reverse the cheshech and the dinim is through revealing God into this world through our nefesh halikis, which ultimately affects the nefesh habamis. And now we're just discussing the extent of the effect. In the beginning, it just, even if on a morning, like a morning like today, if you just even think about God a little, you already bring a little light into the world of Gevurah and cheshech. The more you introduce it into your life and the more it impacts you, the more you reach these levels that we're talking about. So reaching any of these levels is the avodah of the person. The more effort we make, the more we can draw from these higher levels. And definitely certain days of the year, like Shabbos, Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, and so on, give us even more strength. That's an esrotz. So what you're asking is a question about everything. How do we draw any energy into life? Is through our avodah. And that's the way we do it. So right now, as I said, we're talking, for us, we'd be happy even if we just dispelled some darkness, let alone completely eliminated it. But that's why you can't get to the level that Gevurah itself will rise to the highest levels of Helam Atzmi until you first work out the steps of getting rid of the little darkness, getting rid of the darkness, even on a small scale that we're capable of. But the Rebbe Rashab is talking now already pretty high levels, even sweetening the Gevurah, and the Gevurah is not transformed, is also quite a powerful level, because you're bringing total chsadim and light into your life. So if you want to really apply this, I would just ask, just sit down quietly on your own and make a cheshbon hanefesh. What dominates in your life? Is it the bitter waters of Gevurah and cheshech, or is it the sweetness? And what can you do to bring more of the sweetness of chesed and gili into your life? That's how I would translate that in Chassidus applied. And then everybody commensurate to where they are has to figure out how you climb and grow in this context. Okay?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. As I've mentioned a number of times, and I say it again now, you really cannot appreciate or even understand well Chassidus in general, including Ayin Beis, especially these levels, if you try to just academically or mathematically try to figure out where those levels are. Because these levels are generally mostly inaccessible to people like us. Not because it's inaccessible, it's because our lives are so swamped with materialism and with our habits and the routines that we just don't live on this level. So it's very intriguing to learn, but if you want to really start internalizing, you have to start finding in your own life your own little formula, so to speak, engaging where these levels play themselves out in your life. Without it, you're going to be sitting and struggling with trying to figure out each level, scientifically, what's the transformation in the third level and what's the transformation in the second level, and then the first level. And in the first level, you have all these different levels. And honestly, only when it becomes applied in real life will you really appreciate it. If not, it becomes it's very intriguing. I'm not denying it's like studying physics or mathematics or any science, and you learn, all the chemical reactions of any particular element and how they mix and so on. But they're really driving the point home, and that's what Chassidus is applying it. It's applying it to your personal life, to your relationships, to interactions with others. That's really where it comes alive in the fullest sense. And I can tell you, you'll never really be able to fully understand it unless you have that application somewhere. Now, I'm not saying you start applying it. First, you have to learn the levels. But then the next step would be, now, if I really did justice to this, I would stop and not allow ourselves even to go further, even one more page, because even till now, we haven't really discussed how to personalize everything. I mean, I try to interweave it in my classes here and discussions and always emphasize it. But to really do it, we'd all have to sit and say, okay, here's what I did today, yesterday, 2 days ago, compare notes. And that's when it really, really comes alive. I'll be very honest. And this is not what am I saying? This is it's not meant to depress us. On the contrary, just telling you, Chassidus does not resonate, fully resonate until you do that. When you do that, then you start realizing, wow, this is like I said, I think you can build a whole formula just on a formula of mediation, even of how you deal with two forces, Chesed, Gevurah, in our lives, or people have disagreements. And based on this, you can literally figure out steps of how you begin when two people that say Chesed and Gevurah are pitted against each other in total collision course, and nobody's winning. How do you begin to change that? And how do you slowly move to a point where you sweeten a little more, and then even more sweeten and more sweeten, until the point of full sweetness? And even that is not transforming etzemuhus of the adversary. See what I'm saying? So, and then we're not even talking about the Gevurah be'etzem that we're going to learn later, the third level. Even though it's all intriguing, but honestly, you can't understand the higher levels if you don't understand the lower levels. There's no way you're transforming darkness in the deepest way if you can't bring a little light into the darkness. It would be like someone saying, I'm not interested in cleaning my house. I want to bring new furniture into my house. I don't care how dusty it is. I'll bring new furniture and I'll change everything. Everything will be transformed. The Mashiach will be here. It doesn't work that way. First, you have to clean up the dust in your life, in your home. You clean more and more and more until you could say, okay, now I'm ready to bring in some new furniture that won't get dirty by the previous dust. And as you do that, you're slowly dispelling the darkness, more light manifests. It's what we spoke about, really the mutfa murgish muscle of the maturity of emotions, where you're refining your containers. It would be like just like someone, a 5-year-old saying, since when 40 years from now, I'm going to understand everything my teacher knows anyway, why don't you just give me an injection, a shortcut, and let's just go there. It doesn't work that way. You can't have the maturity of a 40-year-old until you first have the maturity of a 10-year-old and a 20 and a 30. That's the way it works. So the only way we can really grow is by first being containers to more energy and more and more and more, and we expand. And as we expand, we're able to achieve higher levels. So the Rebbe Rashab, Ayin Beis, is for everybody. So he's letting it all loose. If he was just teaching you or I, he'd probably be teaching us what's relevant to our level. But here he's giving us a blueprint for everybody. So everybody this can apply to, but remember, he has to give her the whole picture. So that's our job, is to figure out now, where do I stand in this context? So I thought it's always good to refresh that key point that I think is relevant to anywhere, anything Chassidus and Ayin Beis especially, which is so comprehensive. So I hope that was useful.
Very useful.
He's actually giving he himself is actually giving us a map, and then we have to project ourselves. Does he ever explain this? How we do it? I mean, we got a nice word from you, and we understand it, but does he assume we know how to do this, or does he, in any of his works, explain how to do it?
Well, that's why I referred back. I think the key is to go back to page 1308 The truth is, it begins 1307 when he speaks about the process of how you bring light into a dark reality. In other words, he's completely recognizing that we all begin cheshach kafel mechupel. Let's be honest, all of us, whether you're a tzaddik or a Baal Tshuva or a Beinani or whatever you are, everybody lives in this dark world. Whether if someone grew up in Crown Heights or in the yeshiva system and knew everything, they're still living in cheshach kafel mechupel from the point of view of Elokus and a point of view of midas ha'adam, our personalities. So he made it very clear. He didn't begin in saying he's assuming you're already on a high level. He started that's why I'm saying those pages to me, 1307 and on, are very, very fundamental. I keep going back to that because that's where he lays out exactly what you just asked. And that is how you get your divine soul, your Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. That's what he says, the flame of your soul alive. How do you start bringing light into your life? And he goes through the steps. He just now moved pretty quickly to higher levels. But especially after you learn the whole Ayin Beis, it's very clear that that's what he's doing. First he speaks a lot about light, and then he starts going into darkness and the lower levels of transforming the darkness. And if you want, it's all one pasuk in Chumash. V'yadaita hayom. There's a mitzvah, and today you shall know. Ki avayu elikim v'shavesa levavecha. You shall take it to your heart. Ki avayu elikim v'shamayim imal v'la'oretz mitachas einoit. If you learn, especially the way Ayin Beis explained it, that verse is the formula. What do you need to know God? Because if you don't bring God's knowledge into yourself and you don't bring it into your heart, no way this world and its darkness is going to dominate. Materialism is going to be more powerful. And then it has to be Havaya Elikim, which means that the Havaya is shining through Elikim, the Tzimtzum, but it's still not the transformation. And ultimately you get to Einoid. And this has been literally the last 300 pages, just around that. So that's why I keep pointing at, when you see it as a pieces of a puzzle, it's all part of that story. And when you learn one page, it's very easy to just get lost in the page and not forget the picture here. But it all comes back to a method for us to work with the world in which we live, wherever that may be, and going through the levels. Listen, I say even every day we say b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafsha, b'chol meidecha. Let's be honest. With all we've learned, when's the last time you really thought about 3 levels of love in your life, a love of God? We say it every day, lip service. It goes so quickly, we don't even have time to think about it. When you learn Chassidus, it forces you to deliberate what's levavcha, and what's b'chol levavshecha, what's meidecha. And I'm just talking one tefillah, one short v'hafta. The same thing. So that's where it comes down to. When we were taught Chassidus in yeshiva, I don't like to speak negatively. This was completely lacking. It wasn't even mentioned. We learned it literally like learning mechanics, auto repair mechanics. Here's Atzilus, and here are the springs, and here are the valves, and here are the wires, and that's how we learned it. It was not taught in a way, okay, this is a formula for you to grow, to become more refined, have a relationship with Hashem, a relationship with the Rebbe, become more godly. It was all, even Tanya, where it's so clear, battle between materialism and spirituality, between existence and transcendence. It wasn't taught in that language. And I don't know why. I'm not going to start analyzing. It was taught very much like we learn Gemurah. We're going to learn now. There are 39 malachas, and these 39 break down to another bunch of ovis and tuldis, and you get a lot of mechanics, a lot of details, and that aspect. Now, again, there were a lot of Chassidus She'in around in my life. I saw Jews that were very fine and refined and beautiful souls, and they meant well and they were sincere. But they didn't turn it into, let me give you a formula. Here's how you bake the cake. We weren't taught how to bake the cake. We were taught about a lot of ingredients. And hypothetically, if you put them together, something happens. Even Sfir Se'emer. We read Chesed Shebechesed, Gevurah Shebechesed. That's why I wrote that book. And whenever you ask somebody, what does that mean? They say, don't worry, say it. The Eibishter will already, and the Eibishter will refine your toxic, your toxins and your tumah and all that. It was almost like that, like you press the buttons, something happens. And then davening, we never learned to daven. You daven with a minyan, you knocked it off in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and weiter. And, hopefully we could change some of that. It's still not, it's far from perfect, my friends. You all have children.
Wonderful.
It's a way of learning. You have to know how to learn. Look, imagine going to school, going to any class, and the teacher doesn't tell you how to learn it. He just starts teaching you facts. So maybe some people will pick it up because they have their intuition or so on. You have to know, to me, it's like that. It's like music. Imagine sitting down at a piano and no one knows what you're doing. You're just going to start learning how to knock on the piano, and you don't know there's music supposed to come out of this thing. What kind of education would that be? That's very similar. We're taught about all the buttons, the mechanics. So maybe in a pure time, 500 years ago, we lived in a shtetl, it was pure. So, as I always say, we picked up certain godliness just from the smell of the chicken soup in our grandmother's kitchen. But we live in a different world. The world today is toxic, it's polluted. Wherever you go, you're inundated by all kinds of stuff that's very far from godliness, and some of it completely antithetical. So that's one of the reasons Chassidus was revealed in later generations, to counter this darkness. And on the other hand, to give us a taste of Mashiach. But the Rebbe explains that they're interdependent. So it's the only way. I know there are many Jews that are Kabbalah Shel Jews, and they mechanically go through, they wake up 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock, and they go to shul, minyan, or mikveh, minyan, and they do their thing. Beautiful. But for many of us, I can't see, many would not stay with Yiddishkeit if it was just mechanical like that and just following God's orders. Not everybody can do that. And that's why Chassidus is Pekuach Nefesh, because without it, you don't have the neshama. Again, there are many beautiful Jews doing tzedakah and chesed, even if they don't know all this. But still, especially for creative people, and people with energy and people with, that think about soulful matters. I mean, you all know in your life. So I think Chassidus has changed people's lives, and I'm not questioning that. And I think many of you are just living testimony to that. But to turn it into a deeper, detailed blueprint, that's the challenge. I mean, that's really the Chassidus applied challenge. That you could look at Chassidus and have an approach to shalom bias issues, to children who are struggling, to people who are, got themselves stuck in things, or just in general, personal growth and so on. So that's, I mean, Mashiach ultimately is going to be living Chassidus in this world, that people will be living by these principles. And this will be the driving force. We'll be walking Chassidim, embodying these principles in our lives. That's Mashiach. So anything we can do now that somewhat gives us a taste of that or a semblance, you're basically creating Mashiach through that.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I'm using the clapping hands emoji.
Okay.
Just wonderful.
No, this is sometimes, yeah. You learn Ayin Beis, you can get caught up in the whole, and time to time. You see, this to me is given that when the Rebbe Rashab wrote this, he knew this in his through and through. He's writing these words. This sentiment was dripping, was saturating everything he wrote. I have no question about that. It wasn't
wonderful.
Just sitting around. What? Yeah.
I said just wonderful. That was, again, one of your wonderful expositions, extemporaneous, that really give us the chizuk and the inspiration to apply this in our daily lives, which is the bottom line. That's where
Well,
it's
it was
at.
inspired by the question. I mean, we've come back to this point many times, but I think Eliezer and Tzvi and you, and I mean, the questions ultimately really, if you think about it, and I know many questions are about the actual pshat, what level is where and so on. But a lot of your questions really come back to this, for sure, the personal. Yeah.
By the way, you since you're on the issue of where this came from originally, and it came up with the issue of the formula and the derivation of it. So let's put it that way. You mentioned in the last time you did a really lovely exposition last week, like Svi said, once in a while you just really integrate everything. You mentioned a mimer, Al Ken Yomer HaMoshlim, and I just wanted to know, where can I find that?
Tofresh Sadik Aleph. So first of all, today there's a Sefer Mamorim Tofresh Sadik Aleph. So you have to just look on the mimers there. It's a Bolok mimer, I believe. And then it was originally printed in Sefer Mamorim Kontresim. There's a 3-volume set, Sefer Mamorim Kontresim from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Remember, Tofresh Sadik Aleph is the equivalent of Sadik Aleph is what? 1921. 1931. And there's a Sefer Mamorim Kontresim, I think, volume 2, where that mimer is also printed. But better the Sadik Aleph, the newer version, it's more footnotes. I think it's a Hebrew books, Sefer Mamorim Tofresh Sadik Aleph. Just write Sefer Mamorim, it'll come up.
Okay, wonderful. I'll post it too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a fundamental. I also mentioned Basi Ligani, Tofshel Lamed Aleph. The Rebbe, based on that mimer, also elaborates on the evolution of Helam and Simtsum and Gevurah all the way to where we are. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I can post that. I can post that too, because just the derivation of this is wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay, my friends, where are we here? Want to continue? Yeah, let's continue. Or you already have a mouthful? You have plenty to work with, or you want to continue? What's the story?
I always vote for more Chassidus, but I'm just one vote.
Okay, I'll go a little more. I went started late today. I'll go further. When we call Mokim, okay, after stating now, and he made it clear now that this first level of sweetening is to the point where it gets completely sweetened. And he said on the top, Nepach, that the Midas Adin, the attribute of judgment or severity, has been transformed to Mitzvah. Nevertheless, and I think that's the conclusion of the Omnam, that even when all this Rav Chesed is radiating into Zah, a Chesed of Zah, and not just radiating, but b'derech maiver, not b'derech Hislabshus. In other words, in full glory, as he explained. U'makol mokim, ein zeh shamidas adin, nepach legamri lechesed. This still is not the state with the attribute of judgment has been completely transformed to chesed. Shahari b'gemara de Rosh Hashanah daf Yud Zayin Omer Aleph. Yeah, clearly he's interweaving the whole Gemaras here. Before Neisa Oven, Kavish Oven, yeah. He says, because in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah 17a, Omru, the Rav Chesed mata kapi chesed. That Rav Chesed is kindness. Rav Chesed is the abundance of kindness. Mata kapi chesed, it's inclined toward chesed. V'Omer Rab Elazar, oh, he's back to that Gemara. 1 second. Didn't he bring that before? Yeah. He brought the same Gemara. Top of 1319, he brought the same Gemara, Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Elazar Emer Kefshei, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya Emer Neistei. I'm reading in the 5th line, top of 1319. So he says, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar Kefshei. Rabbi Elazar says, this means that it's kavish, it conquers, but it's not transformed. It conquers the oven. Which means that the sin itself is not erased. That's exactly what he said. Top of 1319. He spoke about kavish and noise oven. He said one conquers it, it subdues it, but it didn't erase it. Those are the words. Venesa is that it erases it. Kavish is not erased. He brought that. 1 second. Yeah. He brought that in the 2 levels. One transforms and one. Okay, good. So you see clearly here that even though Rav Chesed is radiating, but it's still a level of kaivish, which is not fully erasing the sin. V'chein mashma, the Rebbe Rashab continues to really ground it. Ma'abachaye Parsha Vayera. So he's bringing now the Rabbeinu Bachaye, famous commentary on Chumash, on Torah, where he brings Pshat, Remesh, Drusad, Rabbeinu Bachaye. On Parsha Vayera, on the Posuk, Al Posuk, Avram Shovlim Keme, which says Avram returned to his place. In Vayera, Shekosav, the Bachaye interprets like this. The Pirush V'Rav Chesed, in explaining the words V'Rav Chesed, abundance of Chesed, Shah Chesed Misrabe Aladin. Now Chesed Misrabe, which means it overpowered. It's more dominant. It's more Misrabe means more abundant. Aladin, over judgment. Mashma. So what is mashma from this Bechaye? Sheyesh Adayin Mitzias. Below they say hadin. When you say something is misrabe, so you're saying one became you say the majority, or you say the consensus. Misrabe means that
like it overwhelmed it. Overwhelmed.
It's not the right word. Overwhelmed here. Misrabe means there's more of it than the other. Like let's say you start off with 50-50, and then it turns to 60-40. That would be misrabe. Because it's more. It just becomes more abundant than the other one. So mashma from that, sheyesh adayim mitzias adin, because then it wouldn't say misrabe. That there's still the existence of judgment or severity. Rakshach chesed misrabe alav. Only thing is that chesed is more than the din. Misrabe alav became more over. It ultimately means overwhelmed, but overrides over. Everything we said till now. Misrabe had alav. What I'm not clear about is this the same as what he said, Teisvis Koyach, or is this the same, or the level that he talks that it's like Maiver, you have Arich Champen Mamish. I think he means because Arich Champen is Rav Chesed, and he's saying that even Rav Chesed is not full transformation. But he did say before that the Chesed becomes complete, the Chesed is completely dominant over the Gevurah. So you have to say that what he means here is that, like we're saying, that it's not just a little more, it's completely more, but you've not transformed the din, you've just completely so-called overridden it. That's what he's saying here, yeah.
The Metzias Adin is still existing.
Yes, correct.
But not experienced at all. But not experienced at all.
Right. Who really cares if it's existing, but it's not effective in any way? So earlier he said two things: that the fact that it exists, even if it's overridden, in some way it's not pure chesed, because there is gevurah there. It's just not affecting. Second thing he said, like with the sweet and bitter water, even if the sweet water is completely 1,000 to 1, you can't. The one somewhere weakens the sweetness a drop. He said that earlier. So that's why transforming is so vital, especially in Ruchnis, which we'll talk about. Okay.
He's also referring to Atsun, that there is a community.
Yeah. It's not over. He's just, we're just getting started. Va'inyan. Should we continue? I'll read a little more here. Let's see. I just don't want to get lost myself here. Va'inyan. What's the inyan in this? The midas v'rav chesed, this attribute or this virtue of abundant chesed. Remember, we're not talking about chesed stam, v'rav chesed. And he brought proof from the Gemara that it's kavish, and the Bachai that's misrabe. Okay, this midas v'rav chesed hu she'ein my nishin esei klal. What is this midah of Rav Chesed? That even though a person did something wrong, and you could have had judgment and punish him, so the Rav Chesed affects she'ein my nishin esei klal. They don't punish him at all. Not just it weakens the sentence. You could have someone. Let's say the regular sentence would have been 5 years in prison, or 49 lashes or whatever. Instead, you have 20 lashes, or it's been mitigated, a lower sentence. No, Ein manishin esei klal ala oven. He's not at all punished for the sin. The eina oven peil mu'uma, and the sin does not have any impact. Umakol mokim eina nimchak legamri, and yet it's still not erased entirely. Ukashiyir chas v'sholem rubi avenes, and God forbid when there'll be an abundance, more avenes, sins, mechshev gam esei ha'oven ba'adeyu. Oh, okay. So in other words, right now, that one sin has been neutralized. So no punishment, no effect. But to say that it's non-existent, no, it's there. And if God forbid the person will do more sins, then that one sin that was so-called neutralized will come back to life, so to speak, and will be considered and counted with the new sins. That's what he's saying, because it wasn't really transformed. It wasn't eliminated. It was just neutralized. It was completely ineffective. It's like saying, I think a great example, going back to chapter 9 in Tanya, which I find to be, that example is tremendous, where he speaks about the Irktana Zaguf, the body is like a small city. 2 kings, 2 empires are fighting over control. And he goes through levels that even if one wins, so you may have the enemy completely surrenders, but you still have pockets of the enemy who are just not saying anything. Imagine controlling a city and no one is doing anything against you. But as soon as somebody comes in that challenges the ones who won, suddenly these enemies that were lying asleep come alive and they join the resistance. So the same thing here, an oven can be completely neutralized, but it doesn't mean you eliminated it. It means it's waiting there. And if the Ribri Avenis Chaz v'Shalom, so then that oven will also come back and be counted within the system. Whereas if you transform your enemy and they become your ally, then it's all over. Then it's a whole different reality. Now that's of course what Mashiach will be, not just the elimination of evil, it'll be the transformation of all the darkness. That's why it'll be a permanent geula, because it's not just temporary or short term or just a neutralization. It's going to be a transformation. Anyway, so that's Rav Chesed. So there's a nafkamina. V'zeu shemidas hadin ein apel me'uma. And that's what it means, that the midas hadin doesn't affect any effect. B'hainu. Oh, 1 second. This is already now a parenthesis that goes a good 15 lines. 10 lines, sorry. Okay, we have now parentheses, 10 lines. I just want to make sure, once you get into it, you could...
around 6 lines.
No, that's a parenthesis within the parentheses.
No.
It goes all the way to the line, L'bchinas Chesed. It's 10 lines. I just counted it. It's fine.
Yeah, but it stays on the same theme. I read ahead. It's a good place to stop, by the way.
Yeah, maybe I'll stop here, because I see he's going more into it. Anyway, point being is, we've established now that you could have a level of Rav Chesed, of Arich Hampin, is completely dominant, but it's not transformed the Gevurah. So therefore, it's completely neutralized, no impact, no punishment, but to say that it's non-existent, no. And therefore, it can come back to haunt you. It's Rachmana litzlan, God forbid, a disease, an infection that has been neutralized, but has not been eliminated. And it could always come back. Whereas elimination and actually transformation even more so, then you're sure it's not going to come back. But that would be the equivalent. You can completely control it and even eliminate its effects on the person. And unfortunately, we regress and things happen. So I think that is, this is, if you want to apply this psychologically, emotionally, there's so many ways to apply this. Because it's all about dealing with, even dealing with trauma or dealing with past pain and suffering. You could neutralize it and not necessarily really completely eliminate it. And then something could happen and it brings back a past experience. I'm just saying there's so many examples you can give. I'll give some as we go. But I'm right now trying to really contain it all, trying to figure out all these different levels he's describing. but it's really developing into something, wow, quite amazing. And that's where I think it really has real application, personal, dealing with the personal Gevurahs in our lives. Whether past regrets or past mistakes or shortcomings or setbacks, and how that affects as we grow. Yeah, a lot to say on this. I'll stop here before the parentheses. It's a good place to stop. So right smack in the middle of page 1320. I'll stop. Anybody want to ask anything? If not, I'll stop the recording.
It's just fascinating the way that he's going now. It's very, very delicate.
And it's also, by the way, it's really a nigla piece too. He's bringing the Gemaras, and it's really, if you look at the Gemara, it's giving a lot of clarity, understanding what the Gemara is saying in Rosh Hashanah. So, these are fundamental sugyas about how sins are erased, and sins are neutralized, etc.
It's not like you're learning a gadget or you're wiping it out. It gives a clarity in every word in this, like you said, mentioned now.
Yeah, especially Rosh Hashanah, the machlekes between Abba Lazar, famous machlekes, Kavish and Nesa. We get a real understanding what we're dealing with it, because usually it's again tekka.